welcome to NQ80 Daily, and today we're going to talk United's worst ever transfers. I'm Ed with Adam. How's it going?
Yeah, it feels weird to be doing this topic, doesn't it? But I think it speaks. It sounds like negative content, right? But I think it speaks to a larger debate, a larger discussion about what the club's done in the last decade and led us to where we are now.
Absolutely. Okay, so to frame this, we're going for wilderness years transfers, so post-Fergie, rather than the whole history of the club. It's basically when 99% of the worst transfers that ever happened have taken. And for context, we're going to take into account impact of the player, quality of the player, cost in terms of wages, cost in terms of fees. And we've both picked out our top 5. There's quite a lot of crossover. So I think we've got 6 players in total, and it'll give you a flavour. And if this isn't the best performing YouTube video I've ever done, well, damn it. I will not be doing negative content anymore.
You got to choose the right headline for it to really get it out there, you know?
Yeah.
Put the worst in capitals, all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Not going to happen. But look, what stimulated this conversation was the fact that Antony is moving to Betis, and we'll get to where we both rank him in terms of the worst. Spoiler, he's in the top 5 somewhere. But got us thinking about just how value destructing some of this behaviour has been from the club over the years. So, all right, give us your number 5, and I'll tell you where he ranks in my list if we
Can I ask you something first?
Of course.
When you did your shortlist, when you researched this last night, I must open up about 17 players. So I've trimmed it down. Can I say I just got a few honorary mentions?
Yeah.
So I had Memphis, Eric Bailly, Donny van der Beek, Falcao, which feels like a lifetime ago now, Alex Telles, Mason Mount. I decided to exclude him. I felt like that's a TBC. Morgan Schneiderlin, for a variety of reasons, manager changeover. And Marcus Rojo had to be on there. The player who was just somehow never red carded in his entire tenure in his 6 years.
Amazing, probably because the rest were scared of him. So, yeah, look, I think all of those are fair shouts for honorary mentions. I discounted all of them for different reasons. Mount came closest just because of the massive fee for a player who is a year away from being out of contract, and he's barely played. I think he's a quality player that hasn't been able to show it because he's never fit. Mostly not his fault, mostly bad luck and all of that. Of the others, Memphis I discounted because it didn't work out for him, but he's had a good career and United got most of the fee back. Same with Schneiderlin. Unbelievably, Everton paid us about what we paid for him because he was absolutely dreadful. And Marcos Rojo was a bit of a waste of money, but he wasn't particularly expensive, and so on and so on. Falcao was a very expensive 1-year loan, as was Sofian Amrabat last year, if you want to talk, £10 million loan fee for a year. Very odd. All dreadful deals, but not quite making the top 5 for me.
Yeah, one of the strange things for me was weighing up the player responsibility versus the club responsibility. I feel like the environment of the club across the time, like someone like Eric Bailly, comes in 22, really only played 1 full season of football at Villarreal. Memphis sort of suffered from the same thing where there's like a club culture problem. It did not facilitate development at all. You really needed to come in as like a finished product or a world-class talent. So for number 5, as you asked, I had Casemiro. So I think the context is always going to be important with these players. £60 million with 10 million in add-ons, 2 red cards in his tenure. Just felt like, especially early on, you couldn't trust him to stay on the pitch as well as he played. 15 goals, 9 assists. He's played like 8,000 minutes, but just the wrong player. That was amidst the Frankie de Jong saga. We're really looking for that ball progressor, the player that could pick up the ball in the half turn from the defenders and progress the ball up the pitch, that player that Erik ten Hag wanted. And we ended up with Casemiro, which is like the antithesis of what I think a lot of fans thought we were going in the direction of. So for me, again, it's not a player thing. It's a club error and a misappropriation of funds, which has led us to where we are today, to the point where, everyone thought he was out the door at the start of the month. But because of those giant wages, whatever they are, around the 300,000 mark, we just can't move him on to another club. The Saudi Arabia interest seemed quite fabricated as a logical thing. But yeah, just the way that the deal has held back the club is more on the decision makers and the scattergun approach they've got to transfers, the shiny new toy of a player from the foreign league, and someone who doesn't fit any identifiable strategy. I'm not sure what you thought.
Yeah, so I had him at number 4 in my list. Look, I think all those points are very valid in terms of the player, the strategic fit, the age of the player, the price. So the massive commitment of £15 million plus a year in wages, plus 60 plus 10 in as a total fee. The package is absolutely ginormous. I mean, 120 plus million pounds committed by United to this deal for a player who was nearly 31 when we bought him. The thing that concerned me most was actually more than the strategic fit, because good players you should be able to adapt your system to good players, was that I felt, having watched him over his last year with Real Madrid, that he was declining physically, and that he was protected a little bit by just how well Toni Kroos and Luka Modric keep the ball, right? So there weren't a lot of counter and transitions against that Real Madrid midfield. They were conceding goals in wider areas than through the centre of the park. I just wondered whether physically it would be too much for him. He had a great 6 months at United, mainly until he got his first red card, right? He got that suspension, came back, got another red card, quite unfairly, I think. Hand on shoulder, sort of on neck, wasn't actually strangling. Unless
they laughed it off. It's still one of the most bizarre things.
I know. So he's really unlucky, but he was never the player again. And we've seen it in moments, haven't we? That he's produced a brilliant game here and there. He's still a massive threat from set pieces, or he would be if he played, which he doesn't anymore. And it's interesting that we haven't seen him a little more under Amorim, maybe in that 8 role, because he's a decent progressive passer. He's a bit scattergun with it, but I'd rather have him there than in defensive areas where he's expected to mop up transitions and just can't do it anymore. And Ten Hag persisted with him for far too long. So yeah, for all those reasons, it's been a bit of a disaster of a deal, and he's still got 18 months left on his contract, so we still owe him more than £20 million in wages. Let alone the £15 million a year PSR cost that he's costing us. Just a massive, massive package overall for someone who's right now offering less than Toby Collier, an academy graduate with almost no experience at all.
Yeah, the weird thing for me, or not the weird thing, if we go back to when he was signed, you can still be excited about a world-class player arriving. And I think, I was certainly excited about the leadership he'd provide, but everyone knew that a 4-year contract was a horrible idea for a player his age, with the likely physical regression with the amount of football he played at Real Madrid because of their success. They played in, gone so deep into Champions League every single season. So heavily relied on that 3-man midfield. And Real Madrid don't give up assets unless they want to. They never sell from anything but a position of strength, and just got played. Like Manchester United just got played on that deal.
I mean, not the first time we've had our pants pulled down, but yeah, very, very much had the pants pulled down. Real Madrid knew it. There's very good evidence that once a player has gone past 400 games, so it's less about age and more about the total miles on the clock, they start to decline. It's not true of all players, of course, different physiologies and all of that, but you start to look for signs that the regression is happening at that point. And then he, having played that many games, he came to United, played 53 games, and that's with the suspension. Like, just brutal amount of football for a player of his age and miles on the clock. All right, he was my number 4. My number 5 was Paul Pogba, which may surprise long-time listeners. I loved him as a player to the point where it really wound people up. He divided the fan base. I still get comments now about Pogba, normally from what I would say were gammon-leaning type people who are accusing me of accusing them of being racist for not liking Paul Pogba. Mainly my issue was around Graham Souness, who just seems to hate black players. I just don't know why. I'm not calling him a racist. I'm just saying every player he hates happens to be a young black man. Yeah, just totally coincidental, Graham.
Leans on racial stereotype criticisms.
All the time. And this happened to Paul all the time. So he's physical, but he's not very intelligent. He doesn't work hard enough. Look at his body language. I mean, you hear these things all the time. Pick another one. Martial, Rashford, I think you should, at a minimum, if you think those things, use different language and stop being so coded. I would suggest on the pitch, the reason why I have him in my top 5 is one, as a footballer, he rarely produced it consistently. There were times when he had a run of games where the numbers looked fantastic. I mean, his data on passing, range of passing, chances created, and all of that was very strong for a time. But then injuries took over. He didn't seem to be able to put those consistent performances in for long enough. We were always waiting for something else. Managers didn't seem to know where to play him. He was played by 8 by Mourinho, who famously expected
unlocking Pogba.
Yeah. Well, there's that debate, but he was expected to play as an 8 and do the defensive stuff, and it was criticised when he didn't do the defensive stuff, and it just seemed ridiculous to me that he was effectively profiled wrong by Mourinho. That said, United had an academy player who they let go for free, or he didn't accept the contract, depending on which narrative you want to accept on that one, then bought him back for £90 million and then let him go for free. Again, all in all, it's a terrible deal financially for a player who just didn't produce enough to justify that massive expense.
It's very much representative of the mistakes the club have made, and it's what's led us to where we are today financially. And I think that, with Pogba had started really well. He had a good first season. He connected with players like Zlatan really well. I just think, like you said, he was misprofiled. He wasn't the second midfielder on a pivot. He was the third man of a 3-man midfield. In that, I believe at Juventus he played in the left side of a 3-man midfield.
Yeah,
with Marquisio and Vidal, and the difference was at United, and I felt like this was a continuous problem, misprofiled exactly what he did. And we just tried to constantly fit him into roles that weren't exactly for him. Now, don't get me wrong, he's responsible. He flirted with other clubs constantly. The ending was really ugly.
Yeah.
The fallout, him leaving on a free, and what's happened ever since is sort of representative of that. But yeah, we're talking about value for money propositions. Again, a massive failure. It's just something that didn't work. He was
a real
very
shame
good
as well, because if you hear quotes from the players who played with him, they all think he's a fantastic player, and clearly the technical quality is as high as it gets, and he always seemed to put in his best performances for France, and that was a kind of sad sort of narrative in his time at United, that every time he went away with the French national team, he was excellent for them, and then talk to the local media, and they would get back into the English press, who would then repeat it. It was all over the back pages, wound fans up no end, who no one likes to hear a player sort of making come hither noises to other clubs, particularly Real Madrid.
And it got really ugly with him and the fans. You remember the incident at Old Trafford, the racial abuse he received.
Yeah.
It was really horrible. And unfortunately, it is a window into how black players are treated in England, sometimes based on the stereotypes. We've had the Souness discussion and stuff. And I don't think we should go too much into that today, but it was a really dark time, the way he was treated at the end, and the whole scenario. It got really awful.
All right, who's next on your list?
A player who has a lot of vitriol with the fans to this day, and that's Angel Di Maria, 59.7 million from Real Madrid. A player who was forced out of the club, never seemed like he wanted to come. Sold a year later to PSG to loss, I think, of about 15 million. I think it was like 44 million to PSG after a year. It was just a circus. I remember the goal he scored at Leicester in that horrible 5-3 loss. I think he had 4 goals, 11 assists in his year. Played like a lot of minutes, about 2,000 minutes all in all. But it was just clear he never wanted to be at the club. Couldn't wait to get away. Was it the robbery?
Yeah.
With his family.
Robbed,
it was the shiny toy. Like, how much did you scout the player, or did you just throw money at a problem trying to fix a representative of the Glazonomics? We'll just throw money at a problem. Like, I think like fans of other clubs often said, well, you've spent £1.3 billion, the Glazers, but it's always been the club's money as well. We know this. Anyway, but we've always just thrown money at problems, and Angel Di Maria seems to fit exactly into that strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. Many players who fit that one, but yes, shiny toy syndrome with him for sure. Yeah, I mean, what he did since and before, and he's still, I mean, up until very recently,
still bowling at Benfica. So
yeah. I think he only just retired from Argentina national team, didn't he? I mean, he's had a fantastic career. It was interesting that in his time after leaving United, he just couldn't wait to pop up with a fairly negative quote about Manchester life, Manchester United. It seemed to really scar him, and maybe that's to do with the robbery, or maybe he just didn't enjoy his time. He didn't enjoy working with Louis van Gaal. He wouldn't be the first player who didn't enjoy working under that particular manager. On the pitch, I mean, just such a talented player who wasn't able to completely fulfill what it was that I think United tried to buy him for. I mean, they bought this kind of wide left forward and then played him in central midfield or a shadow striker for a while. It wasn't clear exactly what problem they were trying to solve with him. I guess nowadays you'd play him on the right side of a front three, wouldn't you, as an inverted forward, where he has had a great amount of success. I mean, he was deployed there by Paris Saint-Germain, basically. The reason I didn't quite have him in my top five, taking over the whole picture, was just like United made most of their money back, right? If you were doing it in PSR terms today, it'd be net even. Really, you paid his wages for a year and amortized off a year of the asset, and then sold him on. And actually, in one sense, that's the model of what you should do with a failed player. Just get it out straight away rather than hoping.
Write it off.
Just write it off. In fact, there were reports earlier in the after the Ineos takeover that their view was that if a player hadn't made it after 2 years, then you should just sell, and they'll probably never make it. And I think it's a fairly good rule of thumb, unless there's a particular reason why you think that player might come good. Ahmad's the exception to the rule, right? He's been at the club for quite a number of years now, and this is really his breakthrough season. I mean, he was spent about half a season last season after he came back from injury on the bench, not being deployed, and now it's his breakthrough season. So you're sure it can happen, but with Di Maria, not a young player, in his mid-20s, didn't want to be there, club weren't getting the best out of him, sold him on, jobs are good, and move on.
Well, it's funny you say about the Ineos 2-year thing. I think what United have been terrible at, I mean, you look at some of the players I mentioned. Marcus Rojo was at the club for 6 years. Eric Bailly was at the club for 6 years. I think 6 and then a year of loan. But, Phil Jones, other players, they just stayed too long. United were much, much more like, let's extend them, give them a contract to protect their value, but then you'd give them this inflated value contract that you couldn't move. And it was part of the problem that United have had of not being able to get value for money in return for their players. Yes, they're already a horrible selling club, but it doesn't help when you give players inflated wages on long-term deals.
Yeah. Well,
in this climate.
The thinking was under Edwards or Ed Woodward, I should say, that you'd have a fat balance sheet, with all these assets on the balance sheet. The problem is, like, if you're paying these players, it's not like a piece of machinery that you can sell on. Or a factory that you can turn around.
Unfortunately, they become liabilities, don't they?
Yeah, they become liabilities because those contracts were way too big. I mean, it's a truism in football that if you have a high ceiling, you have a high floor too, right? They all move together. And there's a few times, whether it's incoming players, not necessarily the Marcus Rojos of the world, but maybe the Angel Di Marias and Falcao, and the new contract that David De Gea signed, it pushed everyone's wages up. And that means, like, some players, it's impossible to sell them to the level of club that would have been most appropriate to them. And Marcus Rojo, probably one of those ones that stayed way too long as a result. And in some cases, United's actually effectively sponsored players leaving. I mean, if you think about Nani, it's a few years ago. It's back at the beginning of the wilderness years where we still had hope we might turn it around. But we sponsored most of his wages when he went back to Sporting for that year.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got another player coming who's about to have a partially sponsored move to Spain. So, but apparently we're paying 84% of his wages. So I guess we'll see.
Well, yeah, that's great. It's just a PSL cost that Betis aren't covering, which is much, much bigger than his wages. And not the one. It's interesting. Like with all the financial literacy we now have in football finance, and there's people like Kieran Maguire's podcast and Swiss Ramble and all of that. It's not seeped through to sports journalists yet. And I suppose you could say, well, why should it? But United pay about £16 million a year in amortised transfer fee on Antony. We actually paid quite a lot of that up front in terms of cash, but the way you calculate the PSR is to amortise the fee across the length of the contract. So £16 million, about £8 million for this half a season he'll spend at Betis. They're not covering any of that. We are effectively subsidising them. Might not be actual cash we're giving them, but we're giving them an asset for free. And anyway, all right. We both have at number 3, Alexis Sanchez, who we got acquired, foisted upon us in a swap deal with Henrik Mkhitaryan. It was slated at £35 million. Although, just an asset value. Of course, these days you'd be looking at that going, well, that's a bit dodgy. We're inflating our PSR incoming money. Maybe they were. But massive wages as well with
10 million sign on. The agent got 15 million. There was rumours of his wage. We know the basic package was at least around £375,000, which is eye-watering even today. The piano intro video, which will never live down. Just the rumours that his first training session, he was like, "What have I done?" Just seeing the difference in standard from Arsenal to Manchester United. Not much of a contribution on the pitch. I believe he was there for a year and a half before his loan to Inter. 5 goals, 9 assists, 3,000 minutes, 45 appearances. Just a disaster. Just seemed like someone who just never, like it's same as the Di Maria thing, just a few years on, just a player who never seemed like he wanted to be there. Seemed like a great idea at the time. Grass wasn't greener.
Grass wasn't greener, and he was past his best. At Udinese and then Barcelona, absolutely brilliant. It didn't quite fit at Barcelona tactically. It was a surprise when they let him go, I guess. But they had other players who were even better, Pedro, Iniesta, so on, and younger players coming through. Did really well at Arsenal. We've done pretty well signing forwards from Arsenal over the years. Well, Robin van Persie did very well for us. No one's going to regret that one. Given his contribution to our last title, unbelievably. The guy's, absolutely silver grey now. Like he's aged about 15 years since leaving United 10 years ago. And that was when our last title was. But yeah, Alexis, total disaster. I suppose in terms of, I'm trying to think, there's probably bigger impacts financially, although his wages were massive. I suspect that had as I was saying, you shift the ceiling up, the floor moves up with it. I suspect that had an impact on everyone else's wages. If you're getting Chris Smalling asking for 150 grand a week, that might have been to do with Alexis being on these 375 or whatever it was. It's one of those things in football where you have to really think carefully, because a lot of clubs, given the amount of football being played and the fact they need to expand their squads as a result, have this kind of 85% rule where 85% of their total wage budget goes on the 15 players who play the most football, and the 15% is meant for the rest, right? That's all right. That's great in theory, but you need to have a really strong academy and a pipeline of younger players coming through to fill out your squad in order to do that. And you don't want to be paying those academy players 100 grand a week just because you're paying Alexis, the star, 375.
It seemed like from reports at the time that it did cause a bit of friction. I mean, remember how good David De Gea was at the time, and that set the grounds for his contract. And that's what led to, that it's always led to a chain reaction of events, these things, to where we are today. And the contract he was on, De Gea, meant he didn't play for anyone for a year. Honestly, I think that's why, because he was just never going to get an offer that was satisfactory to him. But coming back to Alexis, left a year and a half later on a free transfer, that's how desperate United were to move him on. Terminated his contract, if memory serves, and he signed on a free transfer with Inter Milan. It's now at Udinese, It just wasn't, as you said, wasn't the same player. just never fit. I think we signed him thinking he was playing for one side of one wing, and he was actually wanted to play on the other because we needed a right winger. He wanted to play on the left, if memory serves.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to my number 2 that's coming up. We've got this scouting network, and this is what I was thinking when I was doing this list, is that we've bragged about having the world's biggest scouting network. You go through all of these signings over the years. You go through the signings in general, and it feels like it's barely been utilized. Like, sure, there's a United tax added to every transfer. We're seeing that with Patrick Dorgu to a small extent now. But where was the scouting network used? How was it used in conjunction with the recruitment? It's really frustrating.
Well, we're going to come in a bit to another player where there's a disconnect between the acquisition, the commercial people, and the scouting network. Yeah, I suspect that they are not listened to, and United have this massive scouting network that is underutilized or underperforming in some aspect, and they really do need to be in sync. Data and analytics, scouting needs to come together with your, and that's why you have a director of football, right? Pull all these operations together, or a recruitment director, as United have under Christopher Vivell, and we'll see whether we find the fruits of that. I guess the really interesting part about those kind of scouting networks is not finding, as we both have number 2, a Jaden Sancho, who like anyone can watch every single game of every club in the top 5, 7, 10 European leagues. No problem at all. You can do it all the time. It's finding those surprise gems from South America or from an unfancied club in a unproven market. That Brighton have appeared to have a monopoly on achieving at the moment. Paraguay in 3rd division, find another gem there. Right, that's where the real value comes. Or in the case of us, occasionally like a Chicharito found for almost nothing in Mexico, and so on, and then you get real value. Having a scout to tell you should spend £72 million on Jaden Sancho. To be honest, I was surprised this one didn't come off. But now we've had like more reporting on this over time, both about him personally and how the club thought he would work at the club. I was surprised. Haven't seen him so often for Dortmund. I didn't think he could fail. But a bunch of things conspired to mean that he did in a really big way.
Yeah, it feels like a failure of player and club. This is just completely on both. Like, again, coming back to that poor environment, it doesn't facilitate development, it doesn't facilitate success. Players who succeed, like Bruno Fernandes, they succeed in spite of the environment. And that only lasts so long. My whole theory, is that in a toxic environment, eventually even world-class talents are going to fail. And Jaden Sancho is just a player who clearly didn't apply himself. Had issues off the pitch, no doubt. And the club was really good in sending him away and sort of protecting him from that. Then there was mistakes and the public fallout of that. And I think everyone has a part to play in that, whether it's Eric Ten Hag or Sancho. But it just didn't work. I remember it was one of these signings alongside with Alexis. One of the signings that I was most excited for. And like you said, didn't seem like it was bound to fail. It was like, yes, we've nailed this recruitment. It's an expensive outlay, but it's on a player who seems like the exact one we need. And we thought he was going to play on the right. He wanted to play on the left. He said in a training session that's come out since, I prefer to play on the left. I'm a left winger. It's just like, where's the synchronicity between manager and recruitment and then just the player? This is the play. It just makes no sense to me in that regard. How does a world-class club or a club the size of Manchester United not understand or not work in cohesion and know what they're getting? It's just baffling. It's such mismanagement. It's disastrous.
Amazing failure of communication right from the beginning to the end of his time with Manchester United. It's amazing. Now, he may be a slightly difficult personality. I think that has probably come out, that he's probably a little difficult to communicate with. But agent, player, manager, director of football all need to be in sync, both on the acquisition. So, where are you going to play? Like, how many minutes do you expect to play in season 1, in season 2, in season 3? What does the system look like? The smartest players are using analytics and data companies to make sure they're profiled right with the manager and the squad they're going into, as well as the other way round. And it seems that didn't happen. I mean, the miscommunication over his position was hilarious in a way, like darkly hilarious. The communication around the time he had off, where Eric Ten Hag said something to the effect he's not mentally right. And then instead of clearing that up internally, Sancho's agents put out a statement, or did he put out an Instagram post? Instagram post saying, people shouldn't talk about my mental health. And I was like, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is Ten Hag's poor English. I don't think he said he's having mental health problems. I don't think he meant that. And this is like, for me, I don't particularly want to defend Ten Hag because I think he was such a shit and a poor communicator, right? But all around, it just didn't work. And then on the pitch, it's just amazing for a player who put in, 2.5 seasons of like really solid double-figure goals, double-figure assists in a very dynamic Dortmund side. This is a side that played on the counter an awful lot with a lot of pace. He comes to United and he looks slow. He doesn't look like a goal threat. He's running down blind alleys all the time. You can't work out how to play him. He didn't want to play on the right. He's not a right winger. Like, he's a player who wants to come inside and shoot. But he's also a touch player, rather than Marcus Rashford wants the ball in front of him. He wants to play the wall passes, the 1-2s. Will sometimes go outside on the left, but tends not to. Some sad irony in that you'd profile him well for a Ruben Amorim side, wouldn't you? Like, probably, yeah. But yeah, all round complete disaster for United. Financially, I mean, United lose about £50 million cash, but because he had run down 3 years of his contract, it won't be too horrendous on the PSR side of things, but it's wasted cash, right? That could have gone to something else other than Jaden Sancho. And of course, his wages, which were pretty hefty all this time as well.
You wonder how much of it was just a money move and just an agent sort of driven environment, like where United have just thrown money. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's like, obviously the position matters and everything, but it's just like, it's the level of ineptitude. It's just really frustrating. When you look at these deals, especially in recent times, and you go through, Mark Critchley did a really good piece in The Athletic this week on United's cash position and just all the breakdown of the transfer fees owed. And you look at that and you just think about how much money has been wasted in the past few years. It's just mismanagement. It's like Kieran Maguire said, I think if the quote was right, they're a Europa League club spending on a Champions League budget.
Something like that, yeah.
The bill comes due, and it's coming due now, and it's really ugly. And I don't think fans have quite wrapped their head around the position that the club is finding itself now.
No, most certainly haven't. It's still pointing at the owners, and now Ineos are the punching bag. And I'm not here to defend Sir Jim or Ineos by any means, but they're pointing at them saying, why aren't they throwing more money at it? That would be a solution if and when a full takeover happens. It's not going to happen until then because the Glazers...
It makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Glazers are not going to give away more equity for free, and Sir Jim's not going to put more money in without more equity, and unfortunately we're in that.
He's not going to strengthen their selling position. It just doesn't. No. It doesn't make sense. He's put the money in that he agreed to. He can't put any in more from a PSR perspective. No. He's put in the maximum infrastructure amount.
Well, he can put as much as he wants into infrastructure. If he wanted, he could whip out his wallet and build United a new £2 billion stadium out of his own personal wealth. So he could certainly do that. But he's an old private equity guy. There's absolutely zero chance.
Tax-free Jim.
Yeah. That's it. Brexit Jim. Not planning on doing that. But yes, he can't put any more in from an ownership perspective. Like that, United hit the limit on the PSR all the time. It's just it wasn't owner financing, it was debt financing. And so we had this line of credit that we'd use and it would get paid down and then it would just creep up and creep up.
The revolving credit facility, which we've gotten down to double figures. Now it's back in triple figures.
Yeah, got that down, but have no cash on hand, right? So that's... And
losing cash on year, which I think like the bank balance is what fans need to understand. I think we lost about 80 million in cash last year, so it's around the 78 million mark now. It's just they're just the club, and the club isn't bringing in money. They haven't brought in money post COVID.
No,
The club's commercial activities haven't
flatlined.
grown.
Yeah,
That's one thing I'll give Ed Woodward. He was a real commercial whiz. United have not capitalised on its commercial potential. And then you look at what Real Madrid have bought in with their stadium in the last 12 months. Their revenue grew by nearly 30% in the Deloitte Money League, which was a fascinating read to see how, Arsenal have grown, Liverpool have grown. Some clubs have stagnated, but just it's embarrassing for a club of United size to be the only club in that league on that table to be in this position.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot of pain to fix it. Unfortunately, it just can't. I mean, again, if Sir Jim completes a full takeover, he could, in theory, at least, completely wipe out all of the debts and kind of reset at least that part of the finances. What he can't do is just reset the transfer fees owed. And it's going to take 3 years to get all of that out of the system. Unfortunately, we just have to live within our means until then. Live on a Europa League budget if there's Europa League revenues.
What would make sense to you? So, with the time coming where he has the opportunity to purchase the club in full, what sort of makes sense to you on the roadmap?
Yes, I mean, he has, with all his other assets under Ineos, taken full control of a toxic asset, even if it's been a partial purchase at some point. And he's traded bits of the empire, the conglomerate, over time. So it would make a lot of sense if he wants full. I mean, he's got full operational control. If he wants full commercial control, making that full takeover would make sense. They've set a price, $33 a share. It really depends on whether the Glazers want to cash in or whether they think there's additional value that they can gain through this new operational arrangement they've got. So,
Shake Sim to the rescue, though.
Yeah, no, that's not going to.
No, can we? I can't deal. You've probably sent me can we just understand? Didn't provide proof of funds. Didn't do it multiple times. It's in the SAC filings. Just because they've used Mike Keegan and other vehicles to convey a message.
Bid $8 a share less as well.
Yeah,
by the way.
They didn't even offer value on the shares. At no stage was the bid anything serious or close.
No,
it's just. It was. I still don't understand to this day. Apart from thinking it was a good story for Qatar.
Yeah,
for people to want that.
I suspect there was some political shenanigans behind the scenes that we will never find out. Given it's a closed autocracy. All right, talking of bad value for money.
Enough build up to the number one.
Number one, we both had. We did these lists separately. So no surprise here. Antony, player of the week, who came from United for 95 million euros, 80 and a bit million pounds. The only saving grace with this was that his wages weren't that big. But the fee was absolutely massive.
The reports overnight, people have alluded that his wages have been inflated in reporting over the years, and we never really have quite conclusive proof, but it seems like they were around the 105 mark now, and Betis will pay, 84% to be exact of that for the loan spell, but just a disaster. Like, you can compare him and Jaden Sancho. I just think this one comes out on top. United set a price point on this deal that was around the 45 million mark or 50 million mark. They set a position that they weren't going to do that, and then it just carried on and on and on. They didn't look at alternative targets, and that's what has been a problem through all of these transfers, like whether it's Casemiro or others, is that where's the alternatives? Where's your short list of other players? Michael Elise was available for 35 million that summer. What made Antony a better target at 82, 86 million pounds? He just never fit. And then, we can have the debate about playing ahead of Mad and things like that, but ultimately he hadn't really had the level of production in the Dutch league that showed that it would translate. It wasn't like he was in double figures in goals and assists. His analytics weren't great. There was no real hallmark for his market value, whether you went on Transfer Market or elsewhere, was never at that level. It was actually less than half.
United's own scouting department put a figure of 25 million on him, so say reports. no idea if that's true, but it seems to be one that's widely accepted. And that would be about right, I think. If United get that much for him, it will be a surprise. I mean, he has 2 years left on his deal. When we get to the summer 25, that means a book value of just over 30 million at that point. United will end up taking an impairment. This is why I've said on the pod quite a few times, when you buy a bad player for a lot of money, you get fucked twice. Like fucked on the way in, fucked on the way out. And he's in fact managing to fuck us 3 times, because we got fucked paying all these wages. We're getting fucked now on taking a massive PSR hit while not even having the player. And then when we manage to sell him, it will be for a pittance. And unfortunately, we'll then take an impairment charge on that one.
And who would? Like, I'm sorry not to be too disrespectful to the player, but I can't see a club offering 20 million euros. That honestly would be a best outcome to me.
That's probably about right. Yeah. United have no leverage here. They have a player they desperately want to get rid of, and there will not be much of a market. So yeah, it's just a horrendous failure of scouting, of communication, of vision, of understanding. And you can say, well, the player didn't set the price. No. Did Erik ten Hag set the price? No. It looks like it is Arnold and Matt Judge who got their pants pulled down by former United legend Edwin van der Sar.
And now Ajax have somehow spent all the money we gave to them that summer.
Yeah,
they're in their own financial woes.
They have been a disaster
like you said,
too.
It's not really a criticism of the player. Yes, the player didn't produce, was never going to produce to the level of that fee. It's just a failure of the club. All of these signings are a failure of the club. There's no cohesive plan. They were we constantly signed players for a manager. There was never a plan from manager to manager. Again, we've seen that with Amorim, but hopefully we're actually seeing the start of a cohesive plan signed for a particular style that should succeed. What happens beyond Ruben Amorim? Now, that remains to be seen. It's the proof will be in the pudding, and we're a long way from knowing.
Yeah. No, we are, and you hope that given that Amorim's come in, they understand that they are going to need to sign players that are very specific to this profile of manager and the type of system he plays. Now, that's not 1 to 11. Only can play in a 3-4-3. That is definitely not true. It's particularly true of the wing backs. And if they are able to, it just means a small pool of players. If they're able to buy multifunctional players, so Patrick Dorgu looks like he's a player who can play at left back or left wing back. He's a very attacking left-sided fullback for Lecce. Then that's good, right? They understand that if for some reason it doesn't work out with Amorim, or he moves on to another club, or he drops dead, or whatever happens, that you need to be able to not be in a situation again where you can't move a player on. And they will need to right size the budget, both the transfer budget, if we're not in the Champions League next season, and the odds are that we're not going to be, and especially the wage budget. And that means getting some of the highest earners off the wages if they're not performing. If they're performing, if they're Bruno, who will end up being, another double figures assists and goals season this season for sure, then fine, pay them star wages. But for those who are not, they will be looking to move them on, and they need to do that in order to get to a system where the top level earner is a high performer, and so they can have the negotiation from a position of strength when they're giving contracts to younger players like Kobe Mainu, for example.
Yeah, one thing I will back Ineos on is that I understand a ruthless approach to moving on big earners. Casemiro, I think he's been on the bench 13 times, only made an appearance in 3 of those. Marcus Rashford, obviously, nowhere to be seen but the stands at most for the last month. If you're not a value for money proposition as a player, no matter how much you earn, you'll be moved on. And I completely understand that, but particularly you're resetting the wage structure with Hamad's new deal, and we'll find out in time how much that's worth. Kobe Mainoo's deal. There was a video of Omar Barada might have been the Manchester City documentary, and he was talking about what a player is worth to the club, and I think they're resetting the wage structure that way. So what they're worth to the club and what they're worth to the team.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Adam. That was our top 5 plus 1. 6 worst transfers of the United Wilderness era. I hope we passed it. I'm not guaranteeing that we are. It was an interesting set of transfers we made last summer. Not all of them worked quite yet. I mean, I guess we'll see in the fullness of time whether any of them make our next iteration of this top 5 list. But for now, that was a real rogues gallery. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening or watching wherever you are. Catch you again next time.